Aud the Deep-Minded reaches Icelandic tradition not as a lone pioneer, but at the center of a traveling household. Around her move relatives, dependents, enslaved people, livestock, portable wealth, and claims to land. That company reveals what settlement demanded more clearly than any heroic image of an empty shore. Medieval Icelanders remembered Aud as a widowed matriarch who crossed the North Atlantic and established descendants. They also wrote about her centuries after Iceland's main settlement period. Her story must therefore travel along two routes: the remembered genealogy and the material colonization of Iceland. Where they separate, later family memory supplies details that archaeology cannot confirm. The principal written foundation is Landnamabok, the medieval book of settlements. It organizes Iceland's colonization through named settlers, boundaries, kinship, marriages, and memorable episodes. Several medieval versions survive, reflecting copying, revision, and differing arrangements of inherited information. Landnamabok was not a passenger register produced when immigrant ships arrived. It served later communities interested in origins, property, prestige, and the ancestry of prominent families. Aud also appears in Laxdaela Saga, where her descendants anchor a broad, regional family history. That saga gives her dignity, foresight, and authority suited to an exceptional founding ancestor. Neither work can simply be discarded because Icelandic genealogy preserved socially consequential relationships. Neither can be read literally at every turn because lineage stories also legitimated later standing. Aud's remembered ancestry begins across a maritime political world larger than Iceland. Tradition makes her the daughter of Ketil Flatnose, a powerful figure associated with Scandinavian expansion westward. She becomes the wife of Olaf the White, linked in Icelandic sources with kingship in Dublin. Their son, Thorstein the Red, is associated with warfare and authority in northern Britain. The precise historical identification of these figures remains debated across Irish and Icelandic records. Names, titles, and relationships do not align neatly enough to produce an uncontested family chart. Yet the setting itself is credible. Norse power had become deeply entangled with Ireland and northern Britain. Contemporary annals record rulers, armies, alliances, and violent competition around Dublin. Islands and coastal routes connected these political centers with Scandinavian migrants and local populations. Aud's story grows from that mixed Atlantic zone, not from an isolated Norwegian departure. After the deaths of her husband and son, tradition places her in command of a mobile kindred. She is said to have had a ship built secretly in a forest. Shipbuilding, however, required suitable timber, iron fittings, rope, sailcloth, skilled labor, and sustained provisioning. Commanding such resources implied relationships and wealth extending far beyond personal courage. Aud's company traveled through island groups that already supported communities, farms, and political interests. The texts connect her with Orkney and the Faroes before Iceland. At stages along that route, daughters or granddaughters enter marriages that broaden the family's network. These unions make the voyage read partly like a genealogy drawn across sea lanes. They also show why migration could distribute relatives rather than move one intact people. Every landfall required water, grazing, repairs, weather judgment, and negotiations with inhabitants. The saga compresses such work because descent matters more to its plot than daily logistics. Archaeology restores the missing weight of cargo, animals, buildings, and seasonal survival. Iceland's colonization gained momentum from the late 800s into the early 900s. Tephrochronology uses distinctive volcanic ash layers to position human activity within that sequence. The settlement layer, often dated around 871 with a margin of several years, provides an important horizon. Structures and fields above or around that ash help trace the expanding human occupation. Radiocarbon dating and artifact study add ranges, although neither method names Aud. Early farms required turf cutting, timber use, hay production, dairying, and care for imported livestock. Settlers transformed soils and vegetation while adapting practices to unfamiliar local conditions. Pollen, charcoal, and erosion records reveal rapid environmental consequences in many landscapes. Those traces turn settlement from a list of founders into an immense collective labor process. Aud's traditional destination lay in the Breidafjord region of western Iceland. Landnamabok assigns her a substantial claim in the valleys known as Dalir. The coast there opens through islands, inlets, lowlands, and routes toward interior grazing. Such geography could sustain dispersed farms while keeping boats central to communication. Claiming territory did not mean converting untouched emptiness instantly into productive property. Boundaries had to be understood, households planted, animals wintered, and relationships maintained. Tradition presents Aud distributing land to members of her following. Several recipients had been enslaved and were freed, including men remembered as Vifil and Hundi. Their stories preserve slavery within the settlement process instead of portraying migration as uniformly voluntary. Freedom in the narrative comes with land, but later descendants still remembered former status. That pairing shows how social hierarchy could survive even when legal position changed. The pattern, nevertheless, matches a colonizing household using dependency to establish scattered farms. Land grants could reward loyalty, create neighbors, and extend a leader's influence across a district. For freed people, possessions offered opportunity while leaving obligations and reputations close behind. Unnamed laborers almost certainly outnumber the individuals whom genealogical writing chose to preserve. Women sustained these new communities through management, textile production, food preparation, dairying, and family strategy. Aud stands out because the sources grant her authority over property and dependence. Her prominence should not erase less recorded women whose work made long-term occupation possible. Nor does her command prove that Icelandic society offered equal power regardless of gender. Exceptional wealth, widowhood, ancestry, and circumstance could create possibilities unavailable to many others. Aud's Christianity forms another distinct strand of her remembered life. The sources describe her worship at Krossholar, the Hills of Crosses, in her Icelandic territory. Her descendants are said to have treated the place with continuing respect. This memory places Christian practice before Iceland's formal conversion around the year 1000. Norse communities in Ireland and Britain had long encountered Christian institutions, objects, and neighbors. A woman emerging from that Atlantic environment could plausibly have adopted Christianity. No contemporary inscription identifies Aud's faith, and the place name alone cannot prove her ritual practice. Later Christian authors also had reasons to honor a baptized or devout ancestor. The account is therefore possible, culturally well situated, and individually unconfirmed. Its value lies partly in resisting a simple pagan Iceland suddenly converted by law. Landnamabok gives Aud an equally memorable burial outside consecrated Christian ground. It says she was placed near the shore between the high and low tide marks. The explanation is that she would not lie in unconsecrated earth. No securely identified grave allows that episode to be tested. Tidal burial also carries literary force, positioning her between inherited custom and Christian commitment. The image completes the author's portrait too perfectly to function as neutral documentation. Yet it reflects a genuine problem for Christians living without established churches or consecrated cemeteries. Religious belonging could precede the institutions that normally organized death. Aud's historical importance does not depend upon proving that shoreline burial. Her story gathers the systems that made Icelandic settlement possible and unequal. Ships joined the Hebrides, Orkney, Faroes, and Iceland into overlapping corridors rather than stepping stones across emptiness. Kinship turned movement into durable claims, while marriage extended influence beyond one farm. Enslaved and dependent labor traveled beside elite ancestry, though the record names them unevenly. Imported animals and practiced skills mattered as much as decisions by celebrated land takers. Christian experience arrived through Western connections before national conversion created a simpler retrospective boundary. The strongest evidence establishes the settlement process, its chronology, and its Atlantic reach. Medieval texts then place Aud inside that process with a coherent but carefully fashioned genealogy. They may preserve a powerful settler whose descendants remained important in Western Iceland. They cannot certify every marriage, speechless decision, allocation, or ritual detail attached to her. Aud's remembered authority nevertheless explains how Icelanders imagined legitimate beginnings through households, land, ancestry, and obligation. Her followers make the decisive correction to the solitary founder legend. Iceland was settled by communities carrying old hierarchies into a demanding new environment. Aud the Deep-Minded endures because her voyage preserves that entire human cargo within one ancestral name.